Hi everyone, my name's Chris Clark. I'm just going to do a little bit about mental health awareness, okay? Really, my journey with mental health awareness started many, many years ago. My background was health and safety, and probably over a decade ago now, business was struggling with the dreaded stress. Yeah, it was all about stress, it was all about psychological illness. And really, we spent quite a few years going around talking to businesses about stress, but it was all very reactive. It was about engaging with people who were already ill, really. Yeah, I got a little bit frustrated doing that, to be honest with you. We seem to be going back to the same companies year on year, saying the same things, making a bit of a buzz and a bit of a noise, but nothing really seemed to be happening. I didn't feel like we were making any real headway with that. The figures around absence from the workplace are absolutely horrendous. We've heard a lot of figures today. It's costing us, society, a lot of money. But the figure that is really more telling to me, and certainly that I'm aware of when I'm going around to businesses, is not absenteeism, and I deal a lot with HR people, of course. It's presenteeism. Some of the people I teach are doing some very big jobs. They're taking people through education. They're delivering big projects. And actually, we know that the figures say that presenteeism, I'm in, but I'm not really in, is probably the biggest and most shocking figure of all, and that's been estimated at twice as much as absenteeism. If you like, I'm probably the first person that's ever going to tell you that the recession was quite a good thing, because collectively, when I was going to companies, all of a sudden, there was a reason to get things right, to do things a little bit differently. I was probably in a unique position of being employed by me, to be able to look all over the world and see who was doing this better than us, who was ahead of us. And clearly the Australians were ahead of us, and they still are a little bit, and Canada. And I became aware that actually the recession that we saw wasn't really such a negative thing after all. And this has been backed up in the last couple of months by research that said that prejudice and taboos have actually decreased during this recession period. So that's been really good to have that backed up. And certainly anecdotally, I've seen that. I started to look at Australia and became aware of a new thing, a thing called mental health first aid. It's exactly the same as the concept of physical first aid that we're all very, very familiar with. Yeah, it's a very practical course. This lady, Betty Kitchener, she's an academic, but she's not mental health background. And she, like a lot of us, had suffered a bit of burnout at work. She didn't feel that her employers had helped her with that. And her comment to her partner was, if I'd have been physically injured, there would have been physical first aiders to support me. Yeah, and I've been able to go to those. Why isn't there any mental health equivalent for physical first aid? And it was from that one conversation that these very proactive people, she's a bit of a battle axe, Betty, went home and wrote a basic course. They wrote it on the kitchen table, and they started to deliver it in Melbourne at first. It was really well evaluated, and Betty herself has now been given the highest award that an Australian citizen can be given. But it didn't stop that lady when we did the fabulous work in the beginning with Edge Hill, from writing a comment and congratulating them on that. She's that kind of person. So it's gone now to 23 countries. And the course that we deliver in the UK is exactly the same as is being delivered. It's gone there, not through massive investment, but through the best power of all, which is people power, and we love that. It's been well evaluated in Australia. What it does is it builds confidence, it builds knowledge, and it builds that capacity to reach out to somebody else. Yeah? And we don't really have that with mental health, but strangely we do have it with physical ill health. It came into this country when the Scottish Health Authority was struggling with some of the highest male suicide rates of anywhere in the UK. They had services, but guys were just not accessing those services, a little bit like the things that we've heard today. What they thought would be useful is that when somebody's in crisis, if they reach out to a cab driver, a bar worker, their mate, that the mate was a little bit better informed, yeah? And they started to deliver it, had really good success there. So it's delivered by the Scottish Health Authority and by the mental health charity Mind in Wales. And that was what started to attract me to it. Big players were saying that this was yet another tool that we could use to get people to access services in a timely way. Our course then started in 2006. The franchise was bought and it started to operate in London. But in the Northwest, we were a little bit slow to pick it up. I didn't like that. So we had to sort of make up the rear a little bit. It's a CIC, but it is endorsed by our own Department of Health, which is really good. We use simple terminology. We use simple acronyms similar to physical first aid. And what we want to do is make sure that when those skills are needed, people can actually are there and have got a sort of a basic framework to go to. This is not an amazing. We're not trying to take over from counsellors and support workers. But what we are trying to do is give people the confidence and the green light to say, yeah, you can make a difference here. You can be that bridge between that person in crisis, who, as we've heard from Jake, isn't always thinking like they maybe could, yeah, and support, and just to talk to somebody about it. The place where we've seen this be embraced the most is with our American cousins who actually have federally funded mental health first aid. And the figures that they are producing now are absolutely phenomenal. It's going to schools, education environments, it's going to workplaces. We haven't done that yet, but I'm good that I'm working with some very enlightened employers who feel that it's worthwhile to do with their staff and education too. We've had some success. Hooray. To say we stormed it at the awards in February is probably an understatement. There were 10 awards, and of those 10 awards, 5 of them came to the Northwest. And I'm really, really proud to be at Edge Hill today, because this is one of the places that got hailed the most. Not only are we doing it with support staff, but we're recognising the power of students and other students. When I'm in crisis, probably the first person to notice those things and maybe alert a member of staff is another student or friend. Yeah? They've got excellent services here, but sometimes people just aren't in the right place to access those things. If you like, the course is a lot about mental well-being too. We want to get people to understand that just as our physical well-being takes some work, yeah, so does my mental well-being, but actually it underpins everything that I do. It's the emotional and spiritual resilience that I have to enjoy life, to survive pain, disappointments and sadness. And if we don't get it right with people, then actually we're scuppering them from the life that they could have had. That's what that drives me. If we look at this, it builds on the best research that we've got, the Foresight Institute Mental Capital and Wellbeing Research, that recognises our mental well-being is a little bit preordained. There's a genetic capacity to it, and the things that happen to us impact on that, and that wherever I am on that scale, there's work that can be done to improve my mental well-being. A decline in my mental well-being leads to me being very vulnerable to entering that mental ill health curve. It doesn't happen overnight. Yeah? So that's been really good research. We like that. When we look at the awareness days, and we've just had one in September, then last year's theme was stigma, and the World Health Organization said the best thing that we can do is educate people at a local level. We're trying to do that. Yeah? And this year, the theme was connectedness. And again, they reiterated again, the best thing that we can do is educate people. So it's a really good strategy that's endorsed worldwide now. So these 2 products that I deliver, Mental Health First Aid, and our other one, Safe Talk, which is Canadian, is the same for suicide. But it isn't about knowing about it. It isn't about looking at graphs and figures, which are all really important. It's about empowering people to speak to people. Yeah. So the sessions that we do on Safe Talk, you say, well, who wants that? Well, a lot of the businesses I'm working with have seen a massive increase in people contacting the company, on the phones, in crisis, and often talking about suicide. So the staff are having to sort of deal with that. And that in turn is meaning that when they're absorbing that all day, that they're vulnerable. As we heard from Simon, the vast majority of people who take their own life aren't known to mental health services in any way. So they're at work one day possibly, and not the next, and that we're probably looking in the wrong place. So businesses are using this to train up their staff, make them less vulnerable, yeah? And when I do this course with people, I say the most important people I want you to talk about suicide with are the people in your own home. I've got 4 big boys. I'd like to think they can talk to me about anything, but sadly sometimes we can't. And I'd like to think that if they were out in my community and looking a bit down, that somebody would ask them how they are and would be willing and able to have that conversation with them if it wasn't me. That's what drives me. Some of the companies I'm dealing with have been criticised. So housing's been criticised quite a lot, you know. We've seen economic downturn, we've seen the red top papers jump all over it. As we've seen economic downturn go across Europe, we've seen it be followed by an increase in suicide. It's caused riots in Spain, and actually it's caused some really negative publicity. And what it shows to me when we see this is that actually we know nothing about suicide, and that the same old stigmas and cliches come up, yeah? And that actually, when we look at Stephanie Botterill, it was blamed on the bedroom tax, but it takes no account of just how complex suicide is, and that actually suicidal behaviour is on a continuum, yeah? It starts with suicide thoughts. Suicide then becomes into a planning stage, possibly, or not. Somebody could share those suicidal thoughts with somebody and come back from those thoughts. But actually, if I start to plan, and in a plan, there's more likelihood of it happening. And if I start to attempt suicide, then at some stage, I might complete it, okay? So the course is about education, but it's also a lot more about our acronyms again, yeah? Making people ready with a simple acronym to pick up how people are trying to tell them, to know how to ask, to be ready and understand the power of listening, yeah? And to understand those links to help that person increase their safety. Yeah? Not a lot of people know when I'm training them in business that actually, if someone's in crisis, casualty is a place for you to take them, advise them to go. They don't even know that. Yeah? So simple things like that we're doing. So in September, I trained 204 people in Liverpool over 2 days. That's 204 people who know more. Yeah? It's a very, very practical course that builds confidence. This is our sentence. You might go, oh, I couldn't ask somebody. And during the course of the 3 hours, we give people a basic framework. And I know that if I give them the green light and a basic framework, if they need to ask, they will. Because we know that we've told them it's the right thing to do. Yeah? And that will build, and that they will take that into their communities, which is what we want them to do. We're not looking for them to be counsellors and take things on board. That'd be dangerous. But what we are looking for them to do is exactly the same as that physical first aid model, to be that bridge between them, the person in crisis, and that person getting support. Yeah. We understand it with physical first aid. Why is mental health first aid so different? We also do another course called Assist, which teaches other professionals within the workplace to risk assess and do an intervention against an international model of intervention. So that's another one there. I'll just finish up now. Move. We see lots of evidence out there, and we're seeing more and more of this in the media, of people stepping forward and doing that first aid thing anyway. We never know when it's going to be us. And I've got lots of pictures. I haven't got any graphs, but I've got lots of pictures of people. It was quite heartwarming for me to go through all my pictures and see the breadth of businesses, education settings, where at the end of it, I feel like we've made people more prepared to do either that mental health or suicide first aid model. Do you know what? It might not do any good, but it's definitely not going to do any harm. So why not? I'm going to introduce one of my, I suppose one of my clients, and that's one of my housing providers who also won an award at the Mental Health First Aid Awards in February. They're fabulously wonderful, and I've been there all week. Stockport Homes. Thank you.